Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
The silence that lasted years has just been broken inside Buckingham Palace. For the first time, whispers surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's alleged surrogacy controversy are colliding with what many believe is a calculated royal response. Questions about secrecy, tradition, and the line of succession are erupting again, dividing public opinion and fueling global debate. Is this truly confirmation, or just another interpretation of carefully chosen words designed to reveal nothing at all? And do you think the palace is hiding something, or protecting privacy? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. When silence becomes the story. For years, the walls of Buckingham Palace held firm against a growing storm. But now that silence is under intense scrutiny. Allegations surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have suddenly surged from scattered online discussions into the center of mainstream attention, forcing a question many never expected to hear so loudly as the palace finally responded. What was once dismissed as fringe speculation has evolved into a full-scale public debate fueled by headlines, commentary, and a wave of renewed curiosity that refuses to fade. The shift did not happen overnight. For a long time, these claims existed on the edges of public conversation, circulating quietly among niche audiences and rarely breaking into credible platforms. But something changed. As media outlets began picking up the story, repeating key questions, and quoting unnamed insiders, the narrative gained weight. It was no longer just rumor. It became a topic people felt compelled to examine. With that shift came pressure. Pressure on institutions, on individuals, and most of all on the monarchy itself. At the heart of the controversy lies a deeply sensitive issue: legitimacy within the royal line of succession. The children of Harry and Meghan, once simply introduced through formal announcements, are now at the center of a debate that touches on centuries-old traditions. Historically, royal births have been treated with a level of transparency designed to remove doubt. That expectation rooted in precedent has collided with modern values of privacy, creating a tension that is difficult to resolve. As the public revisits these traditions, questions begin to surface again louder than before. The media plays a powerful role in this escalation. Each report, each quote, and each interpretation adds another layer to the unfolding narrative. Some voices suggest that the palace's measured communication style is itself meaningful, while others argue that it is simply consistent with long-standing protocol. The absence of a direct explicit statement addressing the allegations has become a focal point, with observers attempting to read between the lines. In this environment, even routine language can take on unintended significance. Public reaction has been swift and divided. For some, the renewed attention signals that there may be more beneath the surface, something yet to be clarified. For others, it represents the danger of speculation gaining momentum without solid evidence. The debate is no longer confined to isolated discussions. It has become a global conversation shaped by perception as much as by fact. Every statement and every silence is being examined with increasing intensity. As the pressure builds, one reality becomes clear. The story is no longer just about the allegations themselves. It is about how those allegations are interpreted, amplified, and sustained in the absence of definitive answers. The palace now finds itself at the center of a narrative it did not openly create, yet cannot easily escape. And as the spotlight grows brighter, the question lingers whether this moment marks the beginning of clarity or simply the deepening of a mystery that refuses to settle. As the surrogacy allegations break into mainstream headlines, what is the palace truly preparing behind closed doors, damage control, or something far more calculated? And why are certain voices suddenly going silent while others escalate the claims, pushing the monarchy closer to an irreversible breaking point? Keep watching. Voices that ignited the fire. What began as quiet speculation soon found a powerful voice, and that voice refused to stay on the sidelines. As attention intensified around Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, one figure stepped forward with claims that would push the story into a far more explosive phase. Lady Colin Campbell, long known for her outspoken views on royal affairs, began raising direct questions about the circumstances surrounding the births of the couple's children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. Her statements did not introduce entirely new ideas, but they gave existing rumors a sharper, more public edge. For years, conversations about these claims had lingered in scattered corners of the internet, often dismissed or ignored. But now, with a recognizable public figure speaking openly, those same ideas began to carry a different weight. Lady Colin Campbell framed her concerns around transparency and tradition, pointing to long-established royal practices that historically removed doubt about succession. She suggested that the lack of visible verification in these particular births had created a gap, one that speculation quickly rushed to fill. Her words, carefully delivered yet undeniably provocative, became a catalyst for renewed scrutiny. At the same time, media outlets began amplifying the discussion. Reports citing unnamed palace insiders added another layer of intrigue, presenting statements that hinted at unease behind closed doors. These insider quotes, whether interpreted as genuine concern or strategic leaks, fueled the narrative further. Tabloids and commentary platforms repeated key points, often emphasizing the most controversial aspects. Questions about timelines, medical confirmations, and unusual details surrounding the births were brought forward again, each repetition strengthening their presence in public discourse. As the claims spread, the focus increasingly turned toward the children themselves. Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, once introduced through formal palace announcements, were now central to a debate they could not control. Observers began revisiting past details, searching for inconsistencies or overlooked moments that might support one interpretation over another. In doing so, the story shifted from a question of rumor to a broader examination of what had been publicly presented and what had remained unseen. I think that Harry and Meghan have wonderful works of fiction. I think their lives are a fiction. Yet, even as the narrative grew louder, it remained rooted in uncertainty. No direct confirmation supported the allegations and no official statement addressed them heed. This absence created space for interpretation. Some viewed Lady Colin Campbell's comments and the reported insider remarks as evidence that concerns were being taken seriously at some level. Others argued that the entire situation reflected how easily speculation could gain momentum when repeated often enough. The same information filtered through different perspectives led to sharply divided conclusions. What made this phase of the story particularly powerful was not just the claims themselves, but the way they were delivered and received. A single voice amplified by media attention and supported by suggestive reporting had transformed a lingering rumor into a dominant narrative. The controversy now had identifiable drivers and their influence was undeniable. As the discussion continued to spread, one question lingered beneath it all. Whether these voices were uncovering something hidden or simply shaping a story that was growing larger with every retelling. Behind these explosive claims, the story begins to twist in unexpected directions. But who is really pulling the strings? And why are these voices resurfacing now? Stay tuned. A crown questioned from within. What began as speculation now edges into something far more serious, raising questions that reach beyond headlines and into the foundation of the monarchy itself. At the center of this growing tension are Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, whose children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, remain part of the royal line of succession. As public debate intensifies, the issue is no longer limited to rumor or personal scrutiny. It now touches on constitutional tradition where clarity has always been considered essential. For centuries, the rules surrounding royal succession have been guided by strict principles designed to prevent uncertainty. One of the most important of these principles has been the unquestionable legitimacy of birth. Historically, royal births were not treated as private family matters, but as events of national significance. At one time, even government officials were required to witness these moments to ensure there could be no doubt about who stood in line for the throne. Although those practices evolved over time, the expectation of clear and reliable confirmation never fully disappeared. It remained part of an unspoken contract between the monarchy and the public. In this context, the current controversy takes on a different weight. Critics argue that the births of Archie and Lilibet did not follow the same visible patterns of verification seen in previous generations. They point to the limited public details and the absence of widely recognized confirmation from medical authorities as factors that have allowed uncertainty to grow. These observations repeated across media platforms have transformed private speculation into a broader institutional question. If the rules have always required clarity, some ask, why does this situation feel different? As these concerns spread, more extreme suggestions have emerged. Some voices have called for a review of the children's positions within the line of succession, arguing that any unresolved doubt could undermine the integrity of the system. These calls are not presented as conclusions, but as demands for reassurance. Supporters of this view claim that transparency would settle the issue quickly, restoring confidence and ending the debate. Others, however, see these demands as an overreach, warning that they blur the line between legitimate inquiry and invasive speculation. The tension lies in the gap between tradition and modern expectations. On one side is a system built on centuries of precedent where public certainty was once considered non-negotiable. On the other is a more private approach to personal matters reflecting changes in how public figures manage their lives. This clash creates a space where interpretation thrives. Some interpret the lack of detailed confirmation as meaningful, while others insist it is simply consistent with evolving norms. What makes this moment particularly significant is how quickly the narrative has shifted. A discussion that once seemed distant now carries implications for the credibility of the monarchy itself. The line of succession, long viewed as stable and unquestioned, is suddenly part of a wider debate shaped by perception as much as fact. As the conversation continues to unfold, it raises a deeper question about whether tradition can adapt without losing the certainty it was designed to protect, or whether that uncertainty is already beginning to take hold. Behind closed doors, the monarchy faces a question that could destabilize everything. Can succession rules be bent? And who decides legitimacy when tradition collides with uncertainty? If birth verification is challenged, how far will authorities go next from here? Now, stay glued. The evidence no one can see. As scrutiny deepened, attention shifted to something far less visible, yet far more powerful. The absence of clear public proof. Questions surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were no longer driven only by what had been said, but by what had not been shown. In a story shaped by detail, it was the missing pieces that began to draw the most attention, turning silence into a focal point of growing uncertainty. Traditionally, royal births were moments of careful documentation. While practices changed over time, the expectation remained that credible medical professionals would confirm key details, ensuring public confidence in the line of succession. These confirmations were not designed to invade privacy, but to remove doubt. In most cases, brief but clear statements from trusted sources were enough to settle any questions before they could take hold. That pattern had been repeated across generations, reinforcing a sense of stability and trust. In this case, however, observers noted a difference. The births of Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet were announced through official channels. In his newly obtained birth certificate, it shows Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor arrived May 6. Yet the level of publicly visible verification appeared more limited than some had expected. There were no widely discussed confirmations from identifiable medical witnesses presented in the same way earlier royal births had been handled. For some, this absence was simply a reflection of modern privacy standards. For others, it became a point of concern, raising questions about why the usual clarity seemed less apparent. As these observations spread, the narrative began to shift. It was no longer about proving a claim, but about explaining a gap. Commentators pointed to the lack of detailed medical acknowledgement as a factor that allowed speculation to grow unchecked. Without a clear reference point to settle the discussion, each unanswered question seemed to create another. In this environment, even ordinary decisions appeared open to interpretation, and routine privacy measures were viewed through a more suspicious lens. At the same time, a competing perspective continued to push back. Supporters of the couple argued that expectations had changed and that personal medical details should not be subject to public demand, regardless of tradition. They emphasized that official announcements had been made and that no evidence had surfaced to contradict them. From this viewpoint, the focus on missing proof was less about genuine concern and more about the persistence of rumor. The absence of additional detail, they argued, did not automatically suggest something was hidden. This divide highlights a deeper tension between two competing ideas: the right to privacy and the demand for transparency. On one side is a long-standing system that relies on public certainty to maintain trust. On the other is a modern understanding of personal boundaries, even for those in positions of visibility. When these two ideas collide, the result is not clarity but confusion, where each side interprets the same situation in entirely different ways. What makes this moment particularly significant is how the lack of visible evidence has become evidence in itself, at least in the eyes of some observers. The conversation is no longer centered on what is known, but on what remains unseen and unexplained. As the story continues to unfold, this absence does not resolve the debate. Instead, it deepens it, leaving the larger narrative suspended between trust and doubt with no immediate path to certainty. With no public witnesses, no confirmed medical proof, and only silence surrounding the claims, doubts begin to spread. But what is being hidden? Who is controlling the narrative? And why does every official silence feel more revealing than the truth itself at this very moment? Let's find out. When silence speaks loudest, as speculation intensified, attention turned toward the one voice many expected to respond. Yet, it remained carefully restrained. Inside Buckingham Palace, there was no direct statement addressing the allegations surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Buckingham Palace is usually to say that they've announced an investigation into the bullying claims against the Duchess of Sussex. Instead, the palace continued its long-standing approach, issuing only formal limited communications when necessary and avoiding any engagement with unverified claims. What might once have been seen as routine suddenly carried a different weight as observers began searching for meaning in what was not being said. This approach was not new. For generations, the royal household has followed an unwritten rule often summarized as never complain, never explain. The idea behind it is simple. By refusing to engage with speculation, the institution preserves its authority and avoids giving attention to claims that may not deserve it. Official announcements typically focus on confirmed events, offering essential details without expanding into personal or medical matters. This measured style has been used consistently, creating a predictable pattern that reinforces stability and control. In this case, however, that same restraint has become a source of tension. As the surrogacy allegations gained visibility, many expected a clearer response to settle the growing debate. Instead, the palace maintained its usual distance, leaving the claims unaddressed. For some, this silence is entirely consistent with protocol, a sign that nothing unusual is happening behind the scenes. They argue that responding directly would only validate speculation and encourage further scrutiny, setting a precedent the monarchy has long avoided. Others interpret the situation differently. In the absence of a direct denial or clarification, they see the silence as meaningful, suggesting that something remains unresolved. This perspective does not rely on confirmed evidence but on interpretation, where every pause and every carefully worded statement is examined for hidden signals. Routine language, once seen as neutral, is now viewed through a lens of suspicion, as though it might contain clues meant to be read between the lines. In this environment, even consistency can appear unusual. The role of public perception becomes critical at this point. When information is limited, audiences often fill the gaps themselves, guided by personal beliefs and the influence of repeated narratives. Media coverage and commentary amplify this effect, highlighting the absence of a response as much as the original claims. Each discussion reinforces the idea that silence itself is part of the story, transforming a deliberate communication strategy into a subject of debate. This dynamic creates a complex situation for the monarchy. Responding directly could risk legitimizing the allegations, while remaining silent allows speculation to continue unchecked. Both options carry consequences, and neither guarantees clarity. The palace's decision to follow its traditional approach may reflect confidence in established protocol. Yet, it also exposes the institution to modern expectations that demand greater transparency. As the narrative continues to unfold, the silence from the palace stands at its center, not as an answer, but as a presence that shapes every interpretation. It leaves the story balanced between trust in tradition and suspicion of what remains unspoken, suggesting that in this case, what is withheld may carry as much influence as anything that could be revealed. But who benefits from the unanswered questions? And what truth does silence itself begin to confirm before everything changes again? Let's unravel the truth. How repetition turns doubt into belief. As the controversy continued to spread, the focus began to shift from the claims themselves to the way those claims were being told. Stories about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were no longer just isolated reports. They had become part of a wider media cycle where repetition and framing played a powerful role in shaping perception. What people believed was now influenced not only by facts, but by how often and how strongly those facts or interpretations were presented. Tabloids and commentary platforms quickly became central to this process. Each outlet approached the story with its own tone, some emphasizing suspicion, others presenting the situation as an unresolved mystery. Headlines were crafted to capture attention, often highlighting the most controversial aspects while leaving room for interpretation. In many cases, statements from unnamed insiders were introduced as supporting details, adding a sense of authority without offering clear verification. These anonymous sources, while difficult to confirm, became a recurring feature, reinforcing the narrative with each new mention. As the coverage expanded, a pattern began to emerge. Similar points were repeated across different platforms, sometimes with slight variations, but always maintaining the same underlying message. Questions about timelines, medical confirmation, and traditional practices appeared again and again, gradually becoming familiar to the audience. With each repetition, these questions began to feel less like speculation and more like established concerns. The distinction between what was known and what was suggested started to blur. At the same time, tone played a critical role in shaping how the information was received. Subtle wording choices could influence interpretation without making direct claims. Phrases that implied uncertainty or hinted at hidden details encouraged audiences to read between the lines. This approach allowed commentary to remain technically cautious while still guiding viewers toward a particular perspective. Over time, this method created a sense of ongoing discovery, as though each report was revealing something new even when the core information remained unchanged. In contrast, verified facts remained limited and consistent. Official announcements had confirmed the births of Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, and no direct evidence had been presented to contradict those statements. However, these confirmed details often received less attention than the more speculative elements of the story. The imbalance between verified information and repeated interpretation contributed to the growing perception that something significant might be unresolved. This dynamic highlights how easily a narrative can evolve. When speculation is repeated often enough, it begins to feel familiar, and familiarity can be mistaken for truth. Audiences exposed to the same ideas across multiple sources may start to accept them as widely supported even in the absence of concrete evidence. The story becomes less about what is proven and more about what is believed as the media cycle continues. The line between reality and interpretation remains uncertain. The controversy surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry is no longer driven solely by events, but by the way those events are framed and retold. This raises a deeper question about the power of narrative itself and whether the story unfolding is revealing hidden truths or simply demonstrating how perception can be shaped through repetition alone. But within that repetition, details begin to shift, soften, and sometimes disappear entirely, leaving audiences to question what was originally said and what was later constructed. Each retelling adds a new layer of interpretation, making it increasingly difficult to separate documented fact from collective assumption as the story evolves across platforms and public conversation. And the consequences are only beginning now. Behind every headline, a different version of truth begins to form. But who decides what is real when repetition replaces evidence and tone overrides fact? And if the story was never stable to begin with, how far has it already gone beyond control?